I'm Keith Crumwitty, Dean of the Architecture Division at CCA. Thanks for joining us for the Selection Eve conversation with some of the members of Dark Matter University. At CCA, we understand land acknowledgement as a transformative act meant to confront our place on native lands and to build mindfulness of our present participation in colonial legacies. California College of the Arts campuses are located in Huichin and Dmu, also known as Oakland and San Francisco, respectively, on the unceded territories of Chochenyo and Ramaytush Ohlone peoples, who have continuously lived upon this land since time immemorial. We recognize the historic discrimination and violence inflicted upon Indigenous peoples in California and the Americas, including their forced removal from ancestral lands and the deliberate and systematic destruction of their communities and culture. CCA honors Indigenous peoples, past, present, and future, here and around the world, and we wish to pay respect to local elders, including those on the lands from which you are joining us virtually today. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to this evening's event with Taya Wynn, Brian Lee Jr., and Preeti Sodhi, three of the founding members of Dark Matter University, a democratic network of architects, designers, and scholars working together inside and outside of existing systems to challenge, inform, and reshape our present world toward a better future. The conversation tonight will be followed by a Q&A with Shalini Agrawal and Jia Gu, CCA faculty and also members of Dark Matter University. Tonight's event is part of the architecture lecture series titled Remaking, through which we are bringing important contemporary thinkers and makers to CCA to reflect upon the work we must do now to co-imagine a just and equitable future. Join us on Wednesday, November 11th at 1 p.m. for the last of three launch events we're hosting this semester with Daniel's faculty at the University of Toronto for the latest issue of the journal Bracket called Takes Action. After that, we'll have three more events to close out the fall series. Two events on Monday the 16th related to the Urbanism Beyond Corona Instagram series, curated by two of CCA's architecture research labs, the Urban Works Agency and the History Theory X Lab, and co-presented with the Asian Art Museum. The last event of the series this semester will be a lecture by Sean Canty, an alumnus of our B.Arch program, an assistant professor at the GSD, and the principal of Studio SC. You can learn more about the series by visiting scaffold.architecture.cca.edu. And now I'll hand it over to Shalini, who will introduce tonight's speakers.
Good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here with you all and to introduce friends and collaborators tonight. Part of Dark Matter University, it's a BIPOC-led collective of architects, educators, people teaching in architecture and related fields with the intention of creating new forms of knowledge in the field. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce you to our speakers tonight. Preeti Sodhi is the Director of Community Engagement with Friends of the High Line, where she oversees the development and execution of the organization's community engagement strategy. Previously, she served as Project Director of Spaceworks, a nonprofit developer and operator of subsidized artist workplace in New York City. Prior, as a design fellow with Architecture for Humanity, she directed the redevelopment of the LES skate park through a public-private partnership with Nike and the New York City Department of Parks and Recreation. Preeti is the founder of Hello Voter, a civic engagement initiative connecting New Yorkers with local government through voter registration and education workshops, and a core organizer with Design as Protests. Preeti, give a wave. You find Preeti there, yay. Taya Wynn, give a wave there. Is the executive director of the Community Design Collaborative and an adjunct professor at Temple University and Thomas Jefferson University. She's also an organizer and core member of the DAP Collective and Dark Matter University. She has served as the public member on the AIA Philadelphia Board of Directors since 2015. Ms. Wynn received her B.Arch at Syracuse University and her M.Arch at the University of Pennsylvania. Since then, she has focused her career on real estate and community development, prioritizing affordable housing creation, economic development, creative placemaking, and urban revitalization. She's an active member of the National Organization of Minority Architects, serving nationally as the conference advisor. Locally in Noma, she is the President Emeritus and Project Pipeline Director. Additionally, she is board member of Families Forward, a family shelter combating homelessness, and on advisory committee for Hip Hop Architecture Camp, Habitat for Humanity Philadelphia, and Strebe Box PHL. Since 2015, she has sat as chair of the Housing Subcommittee of the West Philadelphia Promise Zone. From 2017 and 18, she's traveled internationally observing the design of public housing as the Stewardson Keefe LeBron Travel Grant recipient. In practice, Taya focuses on equitable development practices, anti-racist design justice principles, and how experience of the built environment shapes perceptions of place. And Brian Lee is an architect, educator, writer, and design justice advocate. He is the founder, design principal of Co-Locate Design, a nonprofit multidisciplinary design practice in New Orleans, Louisiana. The practice is dedicated to expanding community access to design and creating spaces of racial and social and cultural equity. He has led 2 award-winning youth design programs nationwide and is the founding co-organizer of the DAP, which is Design as Protest Collective. He was most recently noted as one of the 2018 Fast Company Most Creative People in Business, a USC Annenberg MacArthur Civic Media Fellow, and the youngest design firm to win the Architectural League's Emerging Voices Award in 2019. I will pass it off to these good friends and people. Thank you. One little logistic. Please use the chat to post your Q&A, and we will be reading them and gathering them. And if you would like to kind of +1, please do. We will be monitoring the chat throughout the talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Shalini. Much appreciated. And I think there are probably 6, 7, 8 other DAP and DMU heads floating around here, and we salute all of you comrades. Thank you for joining tonight, and everyone else, thank you as well for coming and joining us tonight. We're going to talk a little bit about the kind of origins of this work, more broadly about what Dark Matter University is and what its intention is for our professional community, and then ultimately what does that look like put into action, both from the DAP side and precisely from the DMU side. So we'll get started. Right. So again, thank you for showing up. This has been a labor of love, emphasis on the love over the last few months, but really over the last 5 and 15 years for a lot of us. We've done a lot of this work in silos. This work has often been one where we found our spaces in tokenized arenas where we end up being the only people to do this work. And so over the last few years, we've seen a lot of organizing efforts come to be. And one of the ones that has been strong, given the amount of people that you see on this call who are part of DAP and DMU, is the Dark Matter University. All right, so one of the core beliefs is really that for nearly every injustice in this world, there's an architecture, a plan, design that sustains it. And so our policies, our pedagogy, our processes, they all are rooted in some form of especially the development of cities is rooted in some form of racism, being the root of a condition.
All right, so design justice challenges the privilege and power structures that use architecture and design as tools of oppression. And it also forwards the radical efforts of racial, social, and cultural reparation through the process and outcomes of design. So it's kind of taking both of those kind of keywords really and rooting it to both what does design do and how is it creating justice in the situations in which it's employed. All right, so where this kind of all began is we're gonna go back, this year has been one that's been crazy, and I'm sure it's only gonna get crazier this week. So in May, after the murder of George Floyd, Many designers were stuck struggling with, like, what do I do? Like, what does this mean for our field? What does this mean for me as a practitioner? And how can we affect change? Like, what is our power and what are we able to do? And so through DAP, which is Designers Protest Collective, the designers kind of came together to sit and really think about how they could forward this effort. So in support of some of the other activist movements that we've seen traditionally outside of our field, right, outside of architecture, these align with the work of many of the other activist organizations, but specifically the movement for Black Lives and Black Lives Matter. 9 demands were created that were to address sort of what we could do in the built environment specifically, that tied back to kind of all of the civic unrest and issues that were burgeoning in May. Well, they weren't burgeoning because they've existed for many, many years, but you know, it was coming to the forefront publicly. So are you back, Brian? You want me to keep going?
Keep going. Keep going.
All right. Okay. So I'll just read you guys the 9 demands. So the first demand is that our cities and towns reallocate funds supporting police departments and reinvest in the critical needs of disinherited neighborhoods and communities. Demand number 2 is a cease to efforts to implement defensible space and CPTED, which is an acronym that means crime prevention through environmental design tactics. Demand number 3, we cease our support of the carceral state through the design of prisons, jails, and police stations. Demand number 4, we advocate for planning, policies, and procedures that support a genuinely accessible public realm, free from embedded oppression. Demand number 5, that we cease the use of area mean income to determine affordability in our communities, and instead root the distribution of state and federal resources in a measure that reflects the extraction of generational wealth from Black communities. Demand number 6, that we ensure community self-determination through an established procedure that incorporates community voice in process and community benefits agreements in action for all publicly accountable projects. Demand number 7, that we detangle our contractual relationships with power and capital to better serve neighborhoods and communities from a position in service and not from a place of extraction and labor exploitation. Demand number 8, that we invest in and secure the placekeeping of Black cultural spaces. And demand number 9, that we proactively redesign our architectural, planning, engineering, training, and licensing efforts to reflect the history of spatial injustice and build new measures to ground our work in service of liberating spaces.
All right. Is that better? Can you hear me?
You have done it.
Is it clear?
I'm back.
All right, we're back at it. So I'll briefly go through this and just to kind of ground ourselves in the fact that, you know, this work is not done by individuals, it's done by the masses, it's done by collectives. So both DAP and Dmu have rooted itself in this kind of collective nature. So there have been more than a couple thousand people on national calls, more than a couple hundred organizers, 34 to BIPOC DAP organizers, approximately the same Dmu in terms of core organizers, 18 cities represented, and plenty of representation in social media. We're across the country, and we're continuing to grow. So what we're working on and what will lead us to where we're talking about Dark Matter University, there's a network of things that deals with storytelling. How do we actually reveal the narratives of place that continue to shape how we orient ourselves to place? What are the field organizing efforts that revolve around our youth, around students, around practice, around our institutions that start to really allow a framework for practice that centers itself on anti-racist design justice practices? What's the data and research that helps us navigate those conversations in a way that serves to build this effort and this collective faster, quicker, and more precisely? What are the planning and policy efforts that need to happen outside of the profession proper, but within the context of cityscapes that allow us to change policies to better ourselves for the outcome to the future that we are seeking? And then lastly, what are the ways that we can use our skills as a means for direct action? Direct action being ways for us to again challenge the privilege and power structures that again use architecture and design as a means to perpetuate injustice. And so we've talked a little bit about this, but again, there are multiple actions happening within direct action, and one we'll talk about a little bit later on sets us up for tactical protest. So we'll talk a little bit about that later on. So lastly, before I pass it off, again, we talked briefly about number 9 as a part of the demand. And this is where Dark Matter University has found its extremely firm foothold. We are proactively redesigning our architectural planning and engineering training and licensing efforts. We are actively centering that in an anti-racist praxis, and then ultimately allowing that to spread seed within institutions that exist now, but also to establish ourselves as an institution unto itself, able to be free of the kind of structures that reproduce injustices on their daily basis. So Taya's gonna walk us through that portion, and then we'll talk a little bit about the outcomes of various actions that happen by way of that.
Brian, pause on this slide for 1 second.
Yeah.
So when, the DAP collective got together and kind of in May and then through June into July, really trying to respond. You saw some of the direct action that was coming out of that movement. There was some letter writing. I'm sure some of you students had been involved in some of that as well. So what did that mean on the inside? So we were taking each of these demands and trying to break them down to something that was actionable. And so we got to demand number 9, and this was a collective we. So everyone was sitting around kind of our Zoom table and trying to determine, what does it mean? Like, what would it mean for us to really change the way people are taught? What would it mean for us to feel like we belonged at school? And so, across that group, there was a lot of thinking and planning that happened. More folks were invited to the table, trying to kind of find other educators, different perspectives. And with that, sort of the first seed of Dark Matter University was born. And so, this group came together, and you can go to the next slide now, Brian. With Dark Matter University, it was supposed to be decentralized, right? So it's not in any institution, it is not of an institution, therefore it does not carry the same systemic issues as those institutions. It can operate a little bit differently, right? It can mutate and change as needed. And it was a space that allowed folks to come together and really question the pedagogy that we've all been working within and the structures that we've all been working within in the design fields. And so what we came up with is that Dark Matter University is an anti-racist design justice school, collectively seeking the radical transformation of education and practice towards a just future. Dark Matter University is founded to work inside and outside of existing systems to challenge, inform, and reshape our present world toward a better future. But then the question is, what does that mean, right? What does it really mean? So with that, we had to hone in on what the vision would be. And when Brian said there's a room full of people, right, there's like 30 people, right? Trying to figure out what's this collective vision that we all could share coming from different backgrounds. Some were architects, some were graphic designers, some were landscape architects, some were planners. So everyone has a very different socialization to the idea of what design could be. And ultimately, the vision that we landed upon was that we cannot survive and thrive without immediate change toward an anti-racist model of design education and practice. Existing systems have not been able to transform away from centering and advancing whiteness through their reliance on an implied dominant and racialized subject and audience. The impacts of that centering are widespread and can be felt in the inequities that global extraction, racial capitalism, and colonialism have created. And it forced us to really stick and wrestle with many questions, right? Additionally, the earth and the majority of its people have suffered tremendous harm as a result. Collective liberation can only occur within the confines of cannot only occur within the confines of individual institutions. Dark Matter University is founded to work inside and outside of existing systems, again, to challenge, inform, and reshape. So that has kind of the foundation of where we were going. And with that, we had to really hone in on what was going to be our goals, what was our mission. And so we landed on Dark Matter University as a democratic network with the following principles guiding its actions. We work to create new forms of knowledge and knowledge production, new forms of institutions and power, new forms of collectivity and practice, new forms of community and culture, and new forms of design. And our website, which I think folks have dropped in the chat, but if not, I can share it, kind of gets into a little bit more for each one of those bullets. But then, very quickly, we started to gain a lot of steam. People were hearing about us. We had done a few early events, and we had new people showing up every day. And so we're trying to figure out, how do we work? Like, it's really hard once you've created a new thing to not replicate the thing that you are trying to change. And so we really had to sit and question, like, how do you operate differently than a university, right? And we came up with kind of 4 roles that people could take. So there's core. These are the folks that are living, sleeping, drinking, breathing, Dark Matter University. We have the folks that are support. They're down for the cause, right? They are with us every step of the way, but either their schedule is too busy, or they are oversubscribed in other areas, but they still want to be involved. We've got our advisories. Our advisors are folks that they've been in this work a long time. They're entrenched, they're deeply researched, they're deeply connected, and they're going to connect us and help guide us. We really look to them. They're kind of like our village elders, except they're not all elders. And then we've got our network roster, and this is our people. This is our army, right? The network roster, all of the people that have kind of come to the page. They've bought into the vision. They want to get involved. Maybe they're doing some of this work at their own institutions. Maybe they're trying and they're fighting really hard to get some of this moving at their own institution, but it is the resource, right? It's the biggest resource we have, which is the brains and the minds and the energy from our kind of embodied network. And those folks all kind of break into these 3 key committees, is the best way to call it. Our people committee, which is pretty straightforward, right? It's the people. It's how we find people. It's how we bring them in. It's how we onboard them. It's outreach and all of that. Our content team, this is our biggest team. The content team is kind of thinking and developing the curriculum, the research, the programming, the public programming that we're going to offer. And they're really thinking through it down to the granular level. We're thinking, as specific as the syllabus for a course that we might be teaching. The opportunity group, they're really kind of out networking, right? They're trying to figure out what partnerships, what funding resources, how can we structure this thing so that it has some sort of viability and sustainability and longevity, so that we can really operate in a strong way and be the change that we're trying to see. And so, with that, kind of give you an example. This is a typical DMU call. This is from our open house a few months ago. It's really interesting in the Zoom world. I know, you guys are probably Zoom fatigued is a thing, but a lot can happen in Zoom, you guys. I just want you to know, a lot can go down in Zoom. This is just one page of a 20-page guest list. I couldn't fit all the guests on this on one slide to give you a sense of what the experience of a DMU call is kind of like. And then we've got our roster. I just took a snapshot here to highlight Gia because she is here. She's at CCA. You guys have her. She's a resource. You should reach out to her. But also Shalini, also. But this is our these are real people. They're real people at institutions that are doing this work, that have been doing this work, that are interested and are trying to forward similar types of values. So we are trying to connect them. We're trying to find them, and we're trying to elevate them as well. And then we've got our Dmu courses. So there's all myriad of courses that we can have across our network. And these are some that other people are teaching. These are some that people have brainstormed and we're workshopping now to bring out to others. But we're really trying to think differently about how we present architectural and design thoughts. And so with that, we're going to walk through kind of what it looks like, right? Because you guys are students. What does it look like what is a DMU course? What does that really mean? And so we kind of have 4 different types. The first right now is the one that's most readily available on our website. That is our Dmu Recommended Courses. We literally just decided that that's the terminology we're going to use for it. So it hasn't even been updated. You guys are hearing it first. But in the future, if a person is teaching a course that we think is really great at a university, and it's a person that we either respect or a member of our roster, we're calling it DMU Recommended, like a stamp of approval. We're suggesting that you take their class, and kind of first step into kind of understanding this field of work and this design justice thinking. The second is hosted at an institution or a community group, right? Because we are trying to work both in institutions and outside of institutions. These are a little bit different. We have what we call DMU modules. So if you could imagine in your like 15, 16-week course, a module might only be 2 to 3 weeks, might be 4 weeks, but it's going to be one discrete learning opportunity that happens within a larger course. And so modules are useful because you can either slide a module into an existing course. Maybe it's an overview architecture 101 of theory, and you're going to slide in a design justice segment. But we could also put a few modules together and create kind of a longer overview course. The second type that we have is cross-listed, right? So it might be a course at University A and a course at University B, and there's some sort of connection and collaboration between the two. Sometimes they might be taking the exact same class. So you might be literally co-learning with students from a completely different institution, or it could be parallel classes. You guys are taking the same class and you have some shared coursework and some shared discussions that are happening as part of your required course homework. And then the last is hosted by DMU itself. And this is where we were, ultimately trying to evolve, right? Just since May, trying to get to the point that we are offering the whole course ourselves. We're going to come in and essentially like a DMU takeover at your university. And so to give you guys some examples of what these look like, right? So these are some examples of courses that ran this summer. This fall. It's been a long year, y'all. This fall. So 2 of these are actually offered by and taught by Justin Garrett Moore, who I know is on the call. So shout out to Justin. If you guys have any questions for Justin, feel free to harass him in the chat about his specific classes. But we've got a few different courses that are being taught by folks that are also like Preeti and Brian and myself. They're the other kind of DNU initiators that we've got in the fold. And so jumping in, these are examples of some of our recommended courses from the fall. And as you can see, it runs, we've got all sorts of universities here. We've got public universities. We have some Ivy League institutions. We got some top 10s. It's a wide list. We're trying to make sure that this type of work is happening at every school, regardless of where they are, that it should not be something that is only given to the privileged. And everyone has the opportunity to kind of really engage this idea of what it means to be anti-racist in design. And so kind of our first example, and this is easy because it's my class, is the idea of when it's a module. So I teach an overview class at Temple University. I teach it to freshmen. It is an architecture elective that kind of covers it's really the community development design 101. But in my course, in addition to doing some other community outreach efforts, they take they do a segment that's on design justice. So they do many of the activities that were put out part of the Design Justice Summit. And with that, they're really trying to understand what it means to go into a community, what it means to work work within a community, how we as designers are approached, and how we should respect and provide self-determination for those there. But it's an example. This is just 3 weeks that my students do within the larger 16-week semester. And then we've got Dmu Network Seminars. So these are an example. Again, this is Justin's course where Justin's teaching at 2 different universities and they're taking a parallel course together. And then we've got our dark matter. This is our pilot really of what a DMU course could look like. It was hosted this fall at Tuskegee University. So we had 5 DMU professors that taught this course alongside 5 Tuskegee alumni. And this is one of their pro-prac classes that was looking at different careers. And this is kind of an example of one of the lectures. So you can see there's really exposing students to different types of practitioners. So there's folks that had worked in government, small firm, large firm, people that had never really worked in a firm and had been working really on the real estate and community development side, alongside alumni of their school that had been doing different work to kind of expose students to different opportunities in the field. And then luckily, lastly, we're kind of projecting forward. What are we doing next? So spring 21, we got two offerings that we're working on. One is this Design Justice Overview course. So in spring, we're partnering with 6 universities to give you a sense of the range. We've got 1 public university, we've got 2 private universities, 2 historically Black college universities, and 1 Hispanic serving institution. What we will be doing is pairing them. They'll be in cohorts of 2 universities, and each university, each cohort will be taking 1 class. And so the public school and the 2 private schools will be paired with either a HBCU or the HSI to kind of create this cohort collaboration between the groups of students. We're really excited about that. And we are starting now to think about what this looks like for the fall. So for all of you that are interested in learning more, holler at Keith and let him know that this is what you want for fall 21. We would be happy to work with you guys as well. But in addition to that, we are doing community design advocacy, which is really focused on neighborhood groups. And we're doing that with Van Allen with a group in Brooklyn. And so with that, this is kind of the whole, idea of where DMU falls. And we've got some events coming up. Feel free to check our Instagram for more details. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Preeti.
Preeti, do you want me to kind of just give a launch on this stuff real quick? Because this is kind of some of the origin stuff, and then jump in. Just to kind of give you the connection point. As the election started to come forward, we wanted to kind of go back to a little bit of the origins of DAP in general, which rose out of the Noma conference 2015, in which we knew an election was coming up in 2016, and we had a long year of this potential candidate who was a horror show that decided he was going to run a few months later. And so we started to have these conversations in the midst of other political conversations that were happening on the ground with activists and organizers across the country, whether it was Bree Newsom in South Carolina or a lot of us organizing on the ground in New Orleans around the removal of racist monuments here in the city. And to have a conversation with, again, organizers and community members and activists and designers in one room, that was what birthed what we call DAP. And a lot of the kind of conversations were really about what are the tactics that we could use, the strategies that we might use to marshal space as a means to bring attention to a particular issue, and then further that issue to a point of policy change as we moved things along. And one of the things that came out of that was a larger day of action that happened where we had 600 plus people across the country join together in a workshop around the inauguration of said individual. And one of the things that came out of that activity was this larger interaction in public space that was about gerrymandering. And so we had this caution tape that was designed to basically start to talk about people's districts and how they were being gerrymandered into particular actions. And so created this activity or this action called Who the F is Jerry? And it's a way for us to use caution tape to kind of gerrymander your local crosswalks and neighborhoods and bring to attention how you might deal with this particular issue in your community or in your neighborhood. It was small, it was haptic, it was tactile, and it was a way for us to kind of think about moving some of these issues along at a human scale. And so that leads us to a much more current condition in which we, DMU and DAP got together to have a conversation, and something else came out of that. So I'll let Preeti talk through where we are. You're on mute.
Oh, sorry.
There it is.
No, I should be okay. No. So hi, everyone. Obviously, you know, this is very topical. We are the night before the election. And I just want to talk a little bit about what Brian was alluding to, which is what, you know, some collective actions that we had put together. Our most recent direct action initiatives are directed at this election in efforts to boost voter turnout, to talk about the importance of civic engagement, and also to help translate the design justice demands into demands for policy. As you can see on the screen, one of the things that we put together during our first DAP Day of Action was a Design as Protest voter checklist. One of the things that we really wanted to make sure was that everyone involved in DAP had a mechanism or a checklist to check all of the things that you need, essentially, to know to be a prepared voter. You know, to check your voter registration, as you can see on the screen, to know your rights, to check deadlines, to share your plans. And this was generated as a one-pager. And then during our first day of action, one of our colleagues, Dee, generated this into an Instagram post, you know, checklist that could be shared with people throughout their networks. So again, like what we did in our first day of action, we educated ourselves, but we also created something that could be shared externally. You can go to the next slide. And one of the things I just want to share, again, that really is linked to what I do at Hello Voter, but also linked to DAP and DMU is this quote from Nikki Robinson, the CEO and founder of Black Girls Vote. One of the biggest forms of protest is voting. Protesting is in the DNA of our country, and it's a vital and often necessary action to express our collective desires. And this is just to reinforce that, you know, voting is one of the rights that we have in our democracy, and it's linked to a way to express our demands for policy, but it's not the only way. It's just one form. And I'll go on to talk about another way we utilize to express what changes we want at the policy level. This, again, just really quick, this is one of the resources that we shared during our DAP Days of Action. We had two, and it's iwillvote.com. But again, it was a resource that was aimed at a national audience. No matter where you were from, you could utilize this. You could check if you're from New York, like I am, or you know, in Pennsylvania, like Taya, or Louisiana, like Brian. You could utilize this resource to get organized and also share it with others. So again, as part of our Days of Action, you know, it was an information sharing, you know, focused on sharing information. That was part of it. And one of the big things that we wanted to share with each other and also with our larger networks, which was what are our general rights on election day, making sure that people had the information about what you needed to know to vote. Also, if there was any issues you had at when you went to your polling station. So this was really important information that we wanted to share with our members and our network. Next slide. So as I described, you know, information sharing, education was part of our DAP Days of Action, but we also wanted to do collective actions together to get out the vote. One of our members, Sophie, she is currently working as a field organizer for the Democratic Party in North Carolina. And she and I, you know, took the lead to kind of organize some of this content for the DAP Days of Action. And she really wanted to bring forth her experience as a field organizer. So after we did information sharing in the first part of our Days of Action, we collectively did phone banking. to get out the vote in North Carolina. Again, just kind of stressing the action part of it. You know, there's information sharing as part of civic engagement, but there's also action. And I have to say, you know, phone banking, I don't know if a lot of you have done it. It can be kind of scary, but there was something nice about going through the training together as a group with one of our members leading it. And then we had the Zoom on mute and we would all phone bank, but we were all together. We were able to kind of have that relationship together. Next slide. So, you know, the first half of each of our days of action were information sharing. Then there was this collective action of phone banking. In our second day of action, in addition to the phone banking, we did a session of generating ideas for the signage that you see here. And it's a tactical protest to get out the vote. And again, as I mentioned in the beginning, it's a way for us as a group, as a community, to translate the design justice demands into demands for policy. It's that kind of completing that line of becoming an engaged voter, sharing the information with others, taking action, but then also demanding policy changes that fall in line with our values. So here's some images from the previous, day of action that Brian was describing through his work. And then here are some that came out of our DAP Day of Action brainstorming. Brian, did you want to jump in and talk a little bit about this and also the next slide? I think you're on mute, Brian.
There we go. Yeah, trying to get through it. So part of this was making sure that there was an acknowledgement of campaigns and of work that has already been done, right? From other activists, organizers, from our elders, from our ancestors. This work is present and it is historical. It is the future. It is all of these things wrapped up into one. And so we want to make sure that those campaigns were brought to bear and acknowledged. We also wanted to make sure that they were tied back to the politics of it all. And so we have a set of boards, a set of signs that were directly and distinctly about the politics of it all. We have a set that are directly and distinctly about the loss of life for particular communities who have lost their lives specifically from interactions with police and police violence, police brutality. And we have a set of boards that are really about the kind of words and inspiration and things that move us through this work in a unified manner. In large part because we acknowledge that this work is about power building, it's about community building. And the only way to do that is really to make sure that we have a shared voice, a shared kind of mission to move from. And so this was a way for us to community build in terms of designing the signs, but additionally to express that voice publicly. And so you might see, and we wanted to make sure that that voice was expressed and manifested in many of the ways in which our collective is expressed. So we have Farsi, we have Arabic, we have Spanish language, we have Hindi, and so we have a gambit of languages that are being expressed through a lot of the same narratives that you saw on this previous sign. So lastly, you see the installation itself coming together, which is, again, a way for us to aggregate the thoughts, opinions, and hopes and dreams and expressions of pain and truth all in one space. And so this is the inaugural launch of these signs out in public. They will go out in public starting tomorrow and consistently through the election, not just in New Orleans, but across the country. And so we urge and ask of all of you, if you get a chance to be around one, if you get a chance to see one, amplify, and make sure that this is pushed into as many spaces as possible. Again, at the beginning of this, we talked about design justice being a way for us to challenge the privilege and power structures that use architecture and design. And so our ability to occupy space, to occupy land, and in the name of healing, in the name of those who have been harmed by our systems, the better off we will be. So I think we'll close with that and open up to conversations, and we'll come back to this in the what actions to take next. But ultimately, if you want to sign up for anything real quick, I'll leave this up shortly and we'll have a larger conversation about next steps shortly. Thank you. We just assume that you're all standing up out of your seats and clapping. So thank you.
Of course.
Okay, thank you so much, Brian, Taya, and Preeti. I'm going to jump in and initiate the Q&A session, and I think Shalini's here with us as well. I don't know who's sharing screen, but if you could close your share screen, or there, perfect. I also want to say it's always really wonderful to follow the conversations and dialogue and presentations that each of these members have been presenting, and I always learn something new. So DAP and DMU are two extensive incredible organizations. Students are just being introduced in a 40-minute presentation on the workings of the organization. And as you know, typically it's impossible to gain a full picture of what that work looks like and how, let's say, intensive the organizing labor is behind that work. And so I think my first question, and this is really to queue up all the other questions that students might have as they sort of whet their palate in thinking about some of these these concerns, is, you guys are managing to do this nationally, build solidarity and community, and really a kind of complex groupthink through through particular tools and organizing skills. I'm wondering if you could each speak a little bit either to your personal experiences, just to connect students back to the individuals behind this institution building, your personal experiences gaining these skills, like where did you start? How did you begin as organizers? Or how you guys as a group began to develop stronger organizing skills collectively. What were the terms of the negotiations and ways of managing what are inevitable, dense and conflict-ridden, institution building? So that would be my first question. And then, of course, anybody who has questions, please do line up your questions in the chat box, or feel free to raise your hand in the little Zoom app feature that I don't know the name of.
That's a good question to you. I guess I can kick it off. So learning about organizing, man, I don't know. Sometimes I think this is how I came to this world. I would say I started getting involved in kind of activist activities in high school. It was probably earlier than that, but like the first thing I can really remember is high school. I joined a lot of BIPOC kind of organizing efforts in high school that were working to do things around diversity initiatives and culture in our high school. And I feel like I learned a lot of it then. I had a very activistic high school, though. I mean, we were the students that were staging sit-ins so that we didn't have to take standardized tests. So, we were bred a little bit different. But I would say it continued in architecture school, actually. Similarly, I think there were a lot of changes that were happening at my university when I was in architecture school. And I think the student body was really organized, right? There was a group that we called the Society of Multicultural Architects and Designers. We had AIAS. There were women in architecture. We had our own kind of internal political group that was kind of architecture umbrella. And working together, we were dealing with a lot of things that were happening in Syracuse at the time. And so that was really like the best kind of field research. And then when I finished school, I was working largely in community groups. So I've kind of took a non-traditional path, working in community groups at Community Development Corporation for the first 3 years I was working. And then I worked for the Housing Authority, which was a government agency. And so kind of having to navigate these different neighborhoods, right? Going to before these groups, dealing with zoning meetings, dealing with real estate proposals to these different communities, you really had to learn how to navigate the different politics, both actual politics, right? Dealing with elected officials, right? The council people and the state senators that were funding us, as well as kind of all of the political, capital in the neighborhoods with the embodied neighborhood leaders, the Black captains, the resident organizing group, the Civic Association. And so I think, just all of that has just kind of culminated and been very, very useful as we try to navigate kind of this DAP-DMU universe in Zoom.
I think for me, like, part of what brought me to DMU was this like craving for wanting to reflect back on my career as an urban planner. I'm 11 years out of graduate school, and think about, what did I not learn in school that I had to learn through practice? And I'm actually someone who is looking to teach for the first time, because of this desire to look back. And that's why it's been so great for me to be a part of this, because I'm learning a lot from people with more experience like Taya. But what I would say is that, like what she was saying, as someone who did nonprofit real estate development, so much of my work was dealing with government, working with community organizations, and really trying to figure out, okay, this is the goal we're trying to reach, and this is what organizing is. I think in terms of civic engagement, I founded Hello Voter 4 years ago tomorrow. I was at the Javits Center on election night, and I came home kind of deflated, partially because of the outcome, but partially also because I felt like my friends and family who knew that I was engaged with government through my work, they kind of relied on me to be their like local election government touchstone, right? And I felt like, there had to be a way to take more action and to encourage others to take more action on the local level. So I would say in that way, it came out of necessity, and I didn't know how to create an initiative on my own. I just did it. I just did it through action. And I think what's really powerful again about DAP and DMU was it's a way to bring everything together, because I was taking my organizing side as a voting rights activist and my work as a planner and bringing it together. Like how can what we are striving to achieve through our design justice demands, how can that translate to actual policy? Like, what's the civic engagement connection? So I would just say, if you have a desire to do something, just get to work and do it. Find your peers who are doing that work, but also having networks like DAP and DMU where you're around like-minded people with the same values, that really can set that fire for you to start organizing.
Yeah, it can hold on to it too, right? Like, it's one of those things that, we burn quick in this work. As organizers and activists, it is a thing that requires a lot of you, and often a lot of you quickly. And so we can burn out quickly. And so, I think being around other people, as Preeti said, is extremely important because it helps generate more energy within you. And I think this is the most successful we've been in terms of organizing relative to the profession in a long time. Yep, exactly. Iron sharpens iron. For myself, I didn't have a lot of organizing efforts in high school. My parents, I read a lot. Anytime I got in trouble in high school, I'd have to read a book, like a Black history book in some capacity. And so I ended up reading a lot when I was young about these efforts in real ways. And then when I got to college, I helped work on an organization called NEVO, which is Northeast Vibe Organization. So it was community building. And so a lot of those skills around community building for particular efforts within the university led into wanting to run an organization called Nomos once I moved to undergrad and grad school. So I ran Nomos for 5 years in undergrad and grad school, and that really helped me understand, at least the community building side of things in a real way. And so as I started to do that, I was also a high school football coach. And so there was like this idea about connecting back to communities in real ways, to families and to young people and to people who are often bear the brunt of a lot of these issues and don't necessarily have the space or time or energy to deal with the complexity of the systems that we're facing. And so all of those things mixed in a pot started to really shape a lot of the work that I was doing. And then I worked for the Obama campaign in 2007. And that shapes kind of the political aspects of the organizing side of it. And then ultimately, once I moved to New Orleans, the ability to sit down and again, work with youth through Project Pipeline, work with Noma, and then ultimately work with a lot of organizers on the ground around housing rights and housing advocacy in New Orleans, and then ultimately the removal of racist monuments in the city. And so the lineage was really grounded in how we build community for power to change the material outcomes for the communities we serve. And so each little bit along the process gave me something else to learn. And I think all of it was about how we worked again with one another to build that power.
So we've got 2 really good questions from the chat already. And instead of answering them in the chat, I think we should say them out loud. So the first question is a really good question. So thinking specifically of what Southern womanism offers us in education, how are we working to make sure that the violence of formal curriculum is not repeated in the work of Dark Matter University? And so I know Southern womanism is kind of this idea of understanding the embodied knowledge of the folks that are doing the work. That's kind of like what the premise is based on. And that is something that we're really about. I always quote Brian, actually, when I talk about it now. He always talks about it, the Miss Marys on the block, right? And for us, one thing that we're really trying to do is find ways to bring the community activists and leaders and experiencers, right? Because some of this is lived experience, and allow them to be the teachers, right? Because when think about every time you start an architectural project and you have to go out and you have to do all of the precedent research, right? And you're going out, you're trying to learn about this class and or this neighborhood and this site. Typically, we all start in books. Well, at least when I was in school, we started in books. You guys probably start on the internet, on Google, but we start in words, right? Everybody goes and tries to find some scholar that's already written about it, that they're going to trust as the indoctrinated knowledge of what's going on in this neighborhood. And I think we know, nobody knows better what's going on in a neighborhood than the people that live in that neighborhood every day. There's nothing a scholar, no matter how wonderful their PhD is, that has done whatever longitudinal study can tell you that a person that sits on the corner every day and is the neighborhood watcher can't tell you in 5 minutes, right? They've lived it, they've experienced it. They don't get to go home at 6 p.m. They don't get to turn it off. They don't get to put it on a shelf. So I think part of what we're trying to do with DMU is to really open up education to allow more people who have lived that experience to be able to tell their own story and be able to teach their own courses, but at the same time, allow for an exchange, right? Because there are things that we do learn as designers that they wouldn't have as equal access to. It's harder for them to understand the concept of gerrymandering. It's harder for them to understand the process to which a building permit gets pulled in a city. And these are all experiences that affect them on the ground every day in a way that they live it, right? And we just kind of report and research it. So yeah. I think You say, how are we going to make sure that it doesn't happen in DMU? Through accountability, right? I think it's going to take the collective. I think one, it's a good thing that we have so many people. We're trying to include these feedback loops, both from eventually the folks that will take Dmu courses, but as well from each other. We can hold each other accountable, and boy, do we in every meeting. So the good thing is that when you've got a lot of folks around the table, right, you can kind of also police, which is great because you've got 40 people that are going to be like, no, you can't do that. That's bad. That's wrong. And I think that's one thing that's going to help and be very different than the way courses are workshops in the traditional sense. I don't know if Preeti or Ryan, if you got anything to add.
I just want to add, yeah, just one additional thing. Just thinking about, again, womanism from obviously the kind of grounding perspective of Black women from the South, and Black women in movement is so critical to understand beyond the kind of superficial narratives of history's lionization of mostly male dominant or male presenting individuals. And reflecting on, I think often about one story that's often told to us around the Black Panthers here in New Orleans. When we talk about the Black Panthers, we don't just talk about the white society often talks about the kind of armed part of the Black Panthers. We don't often talk about the free food programs. We don't often talk about the kind of teach-ins. We don't often talk about the kind of healing ways in which Black women served to be the not just nurturer, but fighter, but teacher, but right, all of these other various things. And this story was always one that strikes me in that, the violence was imposed upon the Black Panthers in New Orleans in 1970, on September 15th, in which 200 police officers came to the Black Panther headquarters here in New Orleans, and they shot up the place, brought tanks, hundreds and hundreds of bullets. Nobody was harmed and injured. But after that, a lot of the men were like, I don't think I'm gonna go back to this spot for a while. The women saved this space that took care of kids every single day, that they fed and cherished. They stood out, locked arms, and protected this building. Not just for the sake of the building, but for the sake of the community, not just for the sake of the community, but for the sake of the future of this community. And so I think when we think about womanism, it is grounded in that effort specifically of Black women in the South anchoring their efforts in the survival of a broader community, and not just simply the survival of self.
I think just building quickly upon what Taya was saying, it's all of us are coming from we all work in different environments, right? We're coming together in through our work to different degrees. At least for me, I've internalized a lot of white supremacy culture that even I don't always realize, formality, perfectionism, et cetera, et cetera. So I think having that accountability, as decisions are made, it's good because you don't always know when you're bringing that into the conversation, because sometimes it can be so internalized.
Should I read out the second question? That was really great, you guys.
Yeah.
So Tatiana says, thank you so much. Oh wait, no, sorry, that was Maria Ramirez Perez is asking, how do you think architecture can support the teaching and making of spaces for policy, activism, education, and encourage civic engagement, maybe tools? Simple question, guys.
Yeah, so I can start, and if we want to kind of build on it, I think there is a necessary kind of disentanglement that we have to do in order to get to architecture's connection to some of the policy work. But we always start with the kind of 6 Ps in this work, which is pedagogy, policies, procedures, practice, projects, and people. And when you are able to unpack design's role in servicing or in supporting any of those particular areas, we can start to figure out how it's been spatialized in some capacity. And so I often point to just the simple one that a lot of people will recognize is that when we think about redlining, right? Redlining did not call Black people, it did not call for Black people to be segregated out of the space. It actually called for undesirables to be segregated out of spaces. And the procedure by which we carried out that policy called for Black people. It defined undesirables as Black. And so recognizing where policies and procedures and pedagogy shape the outputs is extremely important, because otherwise we're just aiming, we're aiming for issues that we don't fully comprehend. And so I think when we talk about creating spaces that support it, we have to lean into the public sphere, understand what democratic spaces start to look like. We've started to squeeze so much, we've started to privatize everything that was public. We've started to criminalize being publicly available to these kind of democratic spaces. And so the only way that we as designers can start to change some of the course is really to start to think about how public spaces amplify our democratic leanings and amplify our ability to maintain a through line between us and the democracy we believe to be true, right? So I think it's those spaces, it's the civic, communal, and social spaces that are constantly being squeezed out of our neighborhoods and cities that we have to address.
I think also, just like on the individual basis, something I've realized is that, over time, you build your sense of aesthetics, right? You build your point of view, and then it becomes instinctual to make decisions to some degree. And I think for me, I've at the same time had to do that with my own values, right? Like I cultivate my values personally, and then it becomes more instinctual decisions that you're making when it comes to value-based decisions, whether it's civic engagement, whether it's voting, whether it's democracy or what have you. If you can kind of cultivate those within yourself, then it becomes more instinctual about, or a gut check about what works and what doesn't.
Great. We have time for just one more question before we move on to the next steps by DMU. So each of the speakers will be sharing a kind of forward-looking, a kind of 10 minutes forward-looking discussion. So I think the final question, which has a browse back, this is a structural question, our favorite question at DMU. How is DMU related to Noma, and does it have a similar structure of student chapters that can pop up in various institutions like Noma's?
So I would say that DMU is not necessarily related to Noma structurally. There are many DMU members that are also Noma members. There are many DMU participants that are also Noma's organizers or student leaders. But I would say they are definitely very separate. And there's space for everyone. So there's definitely people that are also not in Noma, right? Because we are democratic and we are diverse, and
we are the radical cousins of Noma.
We are we're the crazy cousins there, trying to get put out of events. But no, I would say the best way to kind of understand how it works right now, DMU has no students yet, but our plan is that as we start to onboard classes, that we will kind of create a campus, whether that happens in this digital space, whether it's something that we kind of literally build in some sort of third space. We're still figuring it out, what makes sense as we move forward. But in lieu of us right now not having students, I would say the best way for students to kind of tap into some of the principles that we believe in would be to get involved with DAP student organizing. I dropped the link earlier when we were talking for students to go there and get involved. That's the best way. One, DMU started as part of DAP. And so there are many folks that work in both spaces. Preeti, Brian, and I are 3, but there are many others. So if you're at a DAP meeting, you're probably in a meeting with at least a handful of folks that are also in DMU. And we're sharing resources between the two. So we are also inviting the student organizers into our meetings. So we've had them at 2 of our meetings. It's open door, they can come anytime, but we've literally dedicated to 2 meetings to trying to figure out ways that we can support them, support their work. Right now they're working on a lot of things. One of the big things they're working on is the Anti-Racist Design Justice Index. And so we've been really supporting them and trying to help them workshop some of their ideas. But long term, we're really hoping that we could use students to help co-create content, whether that's courses, whether that's our public content. We really want to invite our students to be a part of the solution, and to really take more of an active and democratic role in the way that they are taught and the way that they learn. Because we often feel that, you know what you're interested in learning, you know what you want to know, right? You know what you don't know, and you know what you want to know. And so tell us what that is, and we'll help you figure out ways for you to kind of curate that knowledge for yourself.
Agreed.
I think, first of all, thank you so much. And it's also really great to see some other DMU folks on the line. Really great for, to have, I love what you were saying, Brian, about, building community for power. And that really does feel like this community of amazing practitioners is that. And also you talked about like, the organizing work is a lot. And so there's also this sense of community that actually helps to energize, because it is exhausting work. And all of these organizers are doing this work literally on the weekends. So this is a lot of extra work that is really fueled by passion, I think, and power, and a desire to see things change. So I just wanted to just acknowledge that. So I think what we're going to do now is transition to next steps. And I will, what do you as, DMU representatives tonight, like that, and there's some of the questions were leading up to that, like what are some of the maybe first and next steps that, that CCA can take, as well as maybe even other schools might take. And, I do want to also call out that CCA has some internal resources too, just for faculty who are interested. We have a decolonial school, which is really looking to decolonize the syllabus and curriculum, and also workshops for BIPOC and white identifying faculty, because the learning is different that we've learned in the school. And also, I just also wanted to do a shout out that Keith invited myself and Jose Brunner to do a workshop at the beginning of the semester about, thinking about what an anti-racist pedagogy might look like. So CCA has been definitely invested in this. So just wanted to also, and those are the ones that I know of. I know that there's some curriculum, some deep curriculum evaluation going on within architecture as well. So, but yeah, just wanted to share that with our speakers, but also wanted to hear from you. Like, what do you think? Yeah, what's the first and next step?
Yeah.
I think the first step is inward looking. I mean, you gotta, I think you gotta look at yourself first, which it sounds like you guys are starting to do. I think you've got to question everything, right? I think that's the first 2 things that I would tell anyone, whether you're faculty or student. Look within and start questioning things.
Yeah. So can I would go to our kind of continuum from status quo to liberation, and think about the framework of liberation as a means to move forward, both from a student perspective and from a faculty perspective, which implores us to repair for past injustices. So seek reparation. First and foremost. That means you have to understand where harm exists. It means that we have to mitigate or create some stabilizing fairness in the moment. So how do we stabilize and make sure that people are fairly acquitted in the moment? How do we remove barriers moving forward? And then lastly, how do we affirmatively influence future outcomes? Because the things that we've done for so long to harm people are cumulative. And just because it's not the same student that was harmed 5 years ago doesn't mean that the accumulative harm doesn't impact that student so much more. And so how do we do those 4 things in our singular actions, and then ultimately in our collective actions. Find a way for reparations, make fair in the moment, to remove barriers moving forward, and then ultimately affirmatively influence future outcomes for those who have been marginalized and disinherited from these processes over the history of our profession. Preeti?
Sorry, I thought that was great. Can you write those 4 things in the chat, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
Really great. I can, yeah, if you don't have it, I was scribbling it, but I'd love, Brian, if you put it in, because you said it so beautifully.
All right.
I mean, I would just agree with what Taya and Brian said, you know, and it's just listening, you know, and really hearing what your colleagues and your students, especially your BIPOC students and colleagues, have to say, and respecting that.
I think also for students, there's a little bit of like owning your own education. I mean, there's many things, and we all know there's many things that we don't learn in architecture school formally. And I think, you know, from the university side, a lot of work can be done to start to change that. A lot of what Shalini kind of outlined is this kind of idea of how do you decolonize the pedagogy. But I think also as a student, you've got to use your own resources, right? And I think you've got to challenge your own precedents. And so I would encourage the students in the meantime, because these changes don't happen overnight, right? Your school is not going to go and completely change curriculum overnight. One, it's not even possible, like the way our structures are set up, the way NAB is set up, it can't just happen overnight. You're going to do some of that work yourself. And so I think it's got to be, you've got to come to a space where everyone feels like they're rallying around the same set of values, and you can trust that like the professors and the leadership are doing their piece. But as students, I think you've also got to do your piece and educate yourself. And so I would encourage students, you know, as you're picking your own precedents, right? When you do your own project and you're going into the library and you're looking things up, or you're on Google and you're trying to figure things out, challenge yourself and try to find an example, right? You know, ask yourself, dude, I'd show up to class today with a bunch of, you know, white men as my precedent research. Maybe I need to go and look a little harder because there's a woman or a BIPOC person or an indigenous practitioner, you know, that has done this. Let me go and see what else is out there and see what examples there are. And I think, you know, until we're all kind of pushing in the same direction, we're not going to see that change occur.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And collaboration wherever possible, you know, like, don't just look within your own field, you know, look across to artists, storytellers, planners, designers, you know. I think like sometimes we're siloed in that way. And it, at least in my education, it wasn't so easy to do that, but I had to take that initiative, like Taya is saying, and like kind of take control of my education in that way.
Yeah. Also, can I just note that, you know, there is you've got to be realistic about what systems are built to do. Systems are built to reproduce themselves as they are. And so it's very, very hard to change institutions. And one of the things that systems often do is they bifurcate into 2 different types of reforms. One is you can do a constructive reform, which again continues to reproduce the same set of outcomes. Or there's a deconstructive reform, which redistributes or distributes power back to people and starts to pull away power from the larger system itself, an effort to again redistribute in some capacity towards some sort of abolition of a system that is harmful. Now, people get scared of an abolition of existing systems, but my general note, and I think the way that we originally thought about DMU is these systems are going to be neutralized by way of us being able to put programs within institutions. Then ultimately the abolition of the frameworks that are harmful to students will have to be, again, abolished. That's the whole point. But that's not where it ends. It moves into the next cycle in which we have to fight even harder to create new systems that actually serve the people. Because if we don't, the vacuum will be filled by the same power structures that existed before. And so our job here is not just to seek abolition, but to seek, again, liberation, freedom, and some sort of restorative consideration that supports a broader population, a broader community.
I just love that last point, and I think I just want to drive home that one of the kind of wonderful, you know, this is something I think about a lot, that every institution is a proposition, and that every institution is a kind of invention, and that every individual has a particular role in the invention of the institution. So what's wonderful about DMU is that it is a proposition that we can reinvent the pedagogical structures, right? And that's something that is really something I think students can think about, that institutions don't have to belong to major powers, that they can be small, nimble, very free-form, kind of community-based instigations, and that these can happen through individuals and through student work or through student organizing. And I think if that's one lesson, if DMU is not something you're participating in, but that you're seeking other forms of institutions, that these are things that you can do on your own with a very small group of people. That's kind of where everyone seems to have started to some extent. So that's my 2 cents. Does anyone have last words? Or Shalini, did you want to, Shalini or Keith, did you guys want to say some last comments?
I would just like to thank you all, Preeti, Brian, Taya, Shalini, Jia, for joining us tonight, sharing the work that you're doing. It's really exciting to actually like see inside the sort of room where, what's the Hamilton line, the room where it happened, like, you know, to hear about how you're organizing, how you're coming together, how the voices are respectful in that conversation and collaborative. And I have this sense, and I don't know whether you would agree or not, but that somehow COVID, the forced exile of COVID, or let's say the forced communality of Zoom produced by COVID, made possible something that maybe would have been more of a challenge if we were all like, you know, literally going to work every day, right? We're not already accustomed to this format. And you don't need to answer that, but I feel like somehow that produced a new way of interacting that made possible this larger formation of the collective. I learned a lot tonight. We are, as Shalini said, and Shalini and Hosea participated from the Decolonial School, but we are in the architecture division, you know, looking at ourselves. And as you said, Taya, like that's a place to start, you know, look at yourself and actively working to, I think, first, think about the whiteness and Eurocentricity of architecture as a discipline. I think there's a project of like white identifying people addressing whiteness, but there's also a project of disciplines that are so powerfully stamped with whiteness addressing that whiteness. So that's one big piece of the work we're doing as we begin to look at how we construct an anti-racist pedagogy, how we open ourselves up to those voices, stories, histories, practices that have been marginalized and suppressed for a long, long time. So I appreciate the knowledge that you shared with us, the practices that you shared with us. Really happy to have Jia doing a course here in the spring that's on your site. You know, we had planned before, but happy to see that it's now part of the, I can't remember what category it was of the courses you're doing, but in one of those categories, and would love to talk to DMU about how we continue and build a relationship with all of you and the work that you're doing. I think it's really important, and we want to share in the journey and do the work in our institution to help advance the same causes. So
I guess
so much.
one last word though, I would say, Keith, because I know you brought up this whole like Zoom thing and like this year and the pandemic and COVID. I would like to say that I don't think that, I think Zoom made it a little easier because people didn't have to travel. It just meant that we either had longer meetings or we had less sleep, right? We got to sleep more. I would say like DMU at its heart actually started from a group text. We're those old folks using analog group text. So, and I would say probably 75% of our conversation still happens in the same group text, and the group text is about 3 years old. So I don't think it would have changed much because the conversations were already happening. I think Zoom just was a tool we were able to use. It was convenient timing.
Well, I will say for us, it is I've been, as sad as I am about not seeing these faces of the faculty and students on campus at events, we have also been able to do events like this where we're able to have several speakers come in, being able to partner with other schools and museums, the Museum of the African Diaspora here in San Francisco, to host events. So maybe I was projecting my own pleasure, some of the silver linings.
Like that's also to say students, right? Like everybody's got that group chat. I know all of you, if you pull out your phone right now, whether it's an email chain, whether it's a Facebook group, you've got that group of people in your phone that you kind of go to when you need stuff. And I think it's about figuring out what's your collective vision and how do you actualize it? Because that's really all the DMU story really is. There was a bunch of people that were already chatting in a group chat that really started as, I would call it, like emotional support for work. That became an idea that's like now, we're starting small, but it's income producing, right? It's changing things. It's breaking down barriers. And so, you got to harness the power of your group chat.
Absolutely. So as we head out, I would just want to again, reiterate that this is a group effort. So anybody who's been on a DMU call, anybody who's DAP, can y'all just turn y'all cameras on real quick? Just give a little wave, just so everybody knows again that this is a multifaceted effort across the board. You'll see some of our faces consistently, but there's so many people who are part of this, and it's absolutely necessary. I want to make sure that they give a hand as well. So thank you, everyone, for joining. It's 9:30. I love y'all, but I am
10:30.
Thank you all. Thank you all, and we would love to. We will share all the links. There are a couple of slides, and we can either pull them out of the recording, or if you could share them with us, some of the slides from the deck with links for people. I would love to put those in our weekly digest so our students can just have those at hand, and look forward to further conversations with all of you. Thank you again.
Also go vote tomorrow.
Go vote. Absolutely.
Let's bring it home, y'all. All right. Be safe.
Good night, everyone.